This series is all about universes, multiverses, planets, worlds, continents and cities, and we're delving not into specific games, but into the Milieux created for them. We'll be looking at where these settings came from, their major features, and why you should consider them for your own gaming experiences. In this episode, we explore the expanse of steppes and exotic kingdoms that sit between the popular Forgotten Realms regions of Faerûn and the far-off eastern lands of Kara-Tur. We have previously visited Faerûn and will be visiting Kara-Tur in future episodes, but the subject for today are the lands in and around the region known as the Hordelands. With the advent of the second edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, TSR began to explore numerous short-lived campaign settings, some of which being subsettings within more established worlds. This even led to some less defined settings, in particular Kara-Tur from 1985's Oriental Adventures expansion for 1st edition AD&D, being attached to worlds that they had previously not been conceived for. In the case of Kara-Tur, this became glued to the eastern extents of the main continent of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, and in 1987 a full box set for Kara-Tur was released, complete with Forgotten Realms banner. That still left the central portion of the now huge landmass, which comprised Faerûn and Kara-Tur, and later would include Zakhara in its southern reaches. Just as Kara-Tur is a pastiche on real-world cultures of the East, Japan, China, Korea, and so on, it would thus follow that this central region draw from the real-world central steppes and surrounds that lie between Europe and Asia. And so, enter the Hordelands, complete with Mongols by any other name, and a number of locations resembling places such as Tibet, Nepal, and others. The Horde box set arrived in 1990, accompanied by, because this is, after all, the Realms, a series of novels, the Empire's trilogy of Horse Lords, Dragon Wall, and Crusade. And again, because this is the Realms, these novels were supplemented by a trilogy of adventure modules, FRA-1, Storm Riders, FRA-2, Black Corsair, and FRA-3, Blood Charge. Before we go into these, and the Hordelands themselves, I want to first touch on something I find incongruous, and I'll delve into a little into something that I found annoying during the period, this particular period of TSR and Dungeons & Dragons history. For me, the Realms was, while not wholly original, echoes of Lankmar, for example, abound in Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate, it was at least different from the settings thus far presented by TSR for Dungeons & Dragons. Greyhawk was a grim medieval world, Krynn had its mixture of dragons and gods, and Mystara had its mix of real-world analogues. And that last is most pertinent because now, with the attachment of Kara-Tur and the Hordelands, the Realms was pretty much the same. In fact, many people I knew would then go back and approach the region of Faerûn with a mind to try and find real-world analogies there, where there were often none to begin with. Although that was to change in supplements such as Old Empires would specifically place Egyptian and other real-world analogies for kingdoms within Faerûn. The point I'm making here is that TSR already had a vehicle for doing fantasy analogies of real-world settings in Mystara. Mystara, carrying only the name of the known world back at its start, had a Mongolia-esque region already in the shape of Ethengar, and worse, Ethengar had only just, in 1989, received a sourcebook of its own. So here we were in 1990, with a previously tacked-on Asia equivalent, and now a tacked-on central sandwich, repeating ground already trodden. In many ways, this heralded the further frustration I felt as TSR pushed out setting after setting, with works of a wide spectrum of quality, instead of focusing on producing quality for a smaller core. Anyway, whatever. In the space of a year, we received so much pseudo-Mongol content from TSR. Other than that mentioned frustrations, this wasn't so much of a bad thing for me. I particularly like that period of history, and have studied it to a reasonable depth. Heck, my wife and I also toyed with the name Temujin for our second child, but fortunately for her, she ended up being a girl, and so got something Arthurian instead. Mongol D&D wasn't a bad thing for me. just what it meant for both the realms, which was becoming more real-world analogous, and Mystara, which was obviously now heading towards the discard pile on TSR's list of settings to support. So that being said, what about it? Well, first, you need to understand that the setting itself comprises a vast array of nothing much, with a collection of bordering civilizations thrown in. The array of nothing much nevertheless lends itself to descriptions of the pseudo-Mongol tribes, how they interact with each other, their way of life, and the inevitable gaming options for bringing this particular stripe of barbarian to player characters. It's all well written, and given David Cook was the box set's author, that should be no surprise. As a setting, it's okay, and showcases pseudo-Mongol life reasonably well. The novels are also okay. Written by Cook, Troy Denning and James Lauder, they are of novels based on games quality, full of character interactions between pseudo-Genghis Yamun, pseudo-Kikuchi Koja, and numerous other pseudo-historicals during their pseudo-Mongol Tugun invasion of Kara-Tur and Faerûn, both of which, it has to be said, being notably less successful than their real-world counterparts, with both Eastern and Western realms remaining largely unchanged. Like one of those movies or TV episodes that threatens to change everything but ultimately leaves the status quo absolutely intact. In this regard, the novels are fun and have some sweeping mass battle scenes, some of which are later appeared in the battle system Horde supplement for miniature wargaming use. My advice, hunt the 15mm miniatures Relpatha released for it, but use Field of Glory instead. And are otherwise entertaining and challenging reads. They're books based on role-playing games. Don't expect much, and, in the grand scheme of Forgotten Realms history, they're ultimately pointless. Now, the adventures, they are, in my opinion, fantastic. There are so many roads the writer, Troy Denning, could have taken when presented with the background of a pseudo-Mongol invasion. What he chose to do was to use the invasion as something that is happening in the background that the player characters cross paths with and interact with every now and again, but does not, otherwise, form the major plot device. It, the invasion, is used sparingly and well to drive the plot forward and, in many ways, to give the player characters some respite between some fairly difficult sections. The adventures assume characters from the West being thrust into unfamiliar cultures, but they could, very well, be used with parties from anywhere within the Forgotten Realms, or, as I have done in the past, transplaced into a completely different world altogether. While the plot of these adventures does, in part, encompass a railroad, it also feels more like the characters being part and parallel to greater events than being pushed along fixed tracks. They are a good set. Past the box set, the novels of the Empire's trilogy, the 3 adventure modules, and the battle system supplement, the Great Waste, the Hordelands, hasn't featured in iterations of the Forgotten Realms after 2nd edition very much. The region is mentioned and appears on the odd map, but following the defeat of Yamun Khan, all appears to have settled back into the daily barbarian nomad routine. Status quo truly restored. The Hordelands and surrounds, as described within the Horde set, comprise a collection of terrain features and few civilized nations. To the north is the Altengri, the Great Ice Sea, with Sosol on its western coast, the endless waste to its southwest, the horse plains to the east, and frozen waters to the north. The wastes in the plains are inhabited by various tribes, or were at the time of the Horde box set, which predates the events of the Empire's trilogy. The Karsidi in the western wastes, the Zamogedi in the western horse plains, the Gur in the northern plains, the Frankian in the east, and further tribes occupy the Ama jungles and the wild areas closer to the border with Kara-Tur. The central endless wastes are inhabited by the Tugun, with the Dalat to the south, Nakan to the immediate west, and Kumani further west, near the Lake of Mists. Further west, beyond a mountain chain, lies Thay, of Red Wizard fame. The kingdoms of Murgom and Semfar, Hug Gboronor, or Bright Star Lake, before the dust desert of Rorin takes over. The Desert of Desolation series takes place here, once transposed to the Forgotten Realms from its original incarnation to its compiled I3-5 form. A strip of land separates Rorin from the mountains of Ailing Shan, which within which sit the secretive realms of Rakati and Khazari. North of Khazari, east of the Endless Wastes, and south of the Horse Plains stands the Koya Desert and the tribal lines of the Ulgur, Quirish, and Kagun tribes. The eastern border of the desert is hemmed in by the Dragon Wall, aka the Great Wall of Pseudo-China Shulung. Swathes of these areas were once controlled by a variety of ancient empires, and the ruins of their might dot the landscapes, and form convenient locations to explore and adventure, of course. The setting has got a lot going for it when it comes to adventure. The wild open expanses of the tribal Hordelands, the mercantile exploits along the Silk Road between East and West realms, the ancient ruins, the harsh deserts and the exotic mountain kingdoms. It's a heady mix, and if you enjoy barbarian fantasy, Marco Polo's exploits, East meet West cultural clashes, and traipsing around the remnants of fallen civilizations, this setting has all of that. It doesn't have so much of the metropolis-type settings similar to Baldur's Gate and Waterdeep, but there are still exotic cities to be visited. The box set delves into the city Daztanar in Semfire to a certain level, for example. The region contains a lot of nothing and a lot of virtually everything else, most of which is woefully underdeveloped. Depending on your approach to campaigns, this can be either a blessing or a curse. As mentioned before, if you enjoy the history of the Mongol conquest era, it's a well-done fantasy iteration of that. It's off the beaten track as far as most fantasy campaigns drawing from the real world go, which generally focus on Western or Eastern traditions rather than this in-between sandwich of the steppe. Works such as the Silk Road, Genghis Khan, any number of works about him, Marco Polo and so on can work as inspiration for adventuring here, and the core box provides a fair selection of loose threads for ancient ruin tromping. And if you want to play the FRA series of adventures in their native setting, that for me is peak Hordelands. However, as part of the Forgotten Realms, the Horde feels tacked on, as does Kara-Tur, but we'll cover that in its own video. Ed Greenwood, creator of the Realms, is on record as saying that it doesn't fit with what he intended for the setting, and I have to agree with him. The Forgotten Realms does not need such real-world analogues in its physical makeup, and as previously noted, TSR already had a world that more than adequately covered that base. So overall, I'd recommend the Horde setting as a good rendition of a fantasy barbarian steppe and its immediate neighbours, but with its less than adequate presence as a glue between Faerûn and Kara-Tur within the Forgotten Realms.